All right. Let's find the pen. Um, it's not very visible. So, trying to get situated. This concept's pretty. Another one. Another whatever. Hopefully, I won't have to boost the audio too much or rework this. I should be able to manage my situation soon enough where I can have everything done in one take, and if that's to be, then it'll be more straightforward, which is pretty much part of the difficulty uh, right now. Sound, space, and yeah. So, regardless, and it's pretty early. Just took supplements and drank what should have been warmer water. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I was planning on sleeping in, and I took a few of the most powerful herbal sedatives that I know of. And they just started to kick in. And I took my supplements and then herbal supplements and stuff, and then amino acids, certain things, and then antioxidants. I had a slip of coffee, and so I'm pretty much half retarded. Pretty much half R word right now. I'm half R'd. It'll help. Okay, so then the idea here is, oh shit, it's a quantum suspension, really quantum. In suspension, you see soul space, the way it works, but all this kind of maps out for me. And the suspension and the quantum are soul islands of time and collective consciousness. How that works, and it's soul. It's like a physics thing. And so, just to put it in googly terms, you have collective consciousness, and then this is so you have identities. We think we are these complete little units. And even that, whether it's like a house, that's a good roof, and you have multiple people there, or a place on top of another place. I'm not gonna keep doing whatever it is. You have your units, your nation, or I don't know what to call it really, land mass with lots of people. But because I mean, if you say nation, it's like yeah, because there's one thing, but that's just because somebody drew a cage around them, mentally or physically. But they actually are bloodlines of genetics that extend forth from time, and so we're looking at in physical translation terms, I guess, how our society develops the tools, symbols, and conceptual structure that enables us to continue forward and organize and self-referentially manage one another and ourselves. Um, these concepts reflect what's really going on, which is something that's taking place, beyond that layer, and you could even say like this layer where you got the people on the surface and the planet and blah 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 and cars driving around and society, right? And so then that's also the layer of your brain and consciousness. It's really mind, but you can kind of stretch it to the brain, and they kind of interplay a little bit. not as direct as they thought. Like you pull out a piece of your brain, you pull out some of your memory or thoughts, but they overlay, and that's the point. One is supposed to holographically match another that is holographically matching different structures, and then those are interplaying with different structures in time that are literally, it would be like the huge towering trees of change that are recorded and piled up in this computer universe, quantum system, not computer, but kind of like a memory log, because all of the change eventually coalesces into these waves like on the seashore, and you have potentially maybe in space or maybe even in the membrane of every atom, these memory logs, if you will, of potentiality and what has happened. And let's just say, how could I describe it? Just like your brain does that, and you have memories built up, the space-time network structures is designed to function like a memory. It's not a memory system, but it's like a log system, and like a reflection system in the sense where part of the information is always not lost in translation, but maintained in refraction, so that you can go back and retrace various steps. Once the system goes out of coherence to a certain point, it can never be brought back. It's just like a cloud that dispersed. But that's also in its own way. You can never be brought back because you might be from a different phase of that universe's memory defragmentation or logging system. It's not really defragmentation, but it's like this quantum compartmentalization. It's frequency based. You don't have a wall to get through, but if your system can no longer function to define the translational space between the two systems, you're not at light year across. You're all of space and time across, because you can't, you'd never experience what it would be like to cross over that. And so then the other sense would be that you couldn't get there, but then a part of you or a sense of yourself could get there. There's all these different ways of looking at it. In that sense, you kind of just have the same system, a disco ball with a bunch of disco balls around it, all trading information simultaneously at a variety of subsequent angles and divisions that map out to create a huge kind of intra-geometric network that extends multiple ways, just like mirrors that you put next to each other, and they create that mirror, infinity illusion inside. It would be just like having a series of disco balls doing that, and then tracing the reflections within and mapping those out as kind of an environment or time, space, or layers of processing information. Don't think about that too hard. And so then the universe is naturally going to be doing that and backing all that information up in itself, or at least what we think the universe is around us. That could just be a nano neural network, neural net processing system, a synthetic one. It could even be that is just advanced enough to read our minds, and therefore we think it's so inherent to our biology or our nature, regardless. And so in all those fields, you call them membranes, or really a membrane separates, but you get to a level, and it's not necessarily differentiated by the information. It's just the fact that that's where information is stored, and then as soon as you look into that, you get all the blockchain of all the information in time, because it's really potential. You're looking at anchor points of what can and can't happen, and then anything that's possible in between that. You don't really need to see when and where and how that potentiality happened. You just make these systems, and then you get these potentialities, and then you can map them out, and then let's just say go to there, if you figure out how the universe works, in a way. And sometimes it blends creating and actually experiencing it in the same sense as if you're accessing a dream layer of the universe itself, and things get really blurry from there, because it's as if the universe is processing just like your brain. And what's the difference between a dream and reality is just the processing within the system. And obviously there's a lot more than that, but to the brain itself, that's the difference. Meaning you trick the brain, you could trick yourself into believing or seeing something that's part of non-reality, so to speak, and the universe will also believe it and play that out as a reality. It's weird, but not in that same sense. Kind of just skip the explanations. So we're defining from these, so you have limited amount of definition. How are you going to increase the details in space-time space or non-space space in order to reflect what happened in space-time space, so that there's some type of translational memory of this, universe? It explodes and shrinks down. And where's it stored? In these outer membranes and these, collapsed waves and, sub-dimensional patterns that are imprinted in between the magnetic layers of atoms and planets and so on. Regardless, it's non-physical, and it's more, we would begin to call it holographic, but holographic is still mapped out from the not the 3D layer, but it's incorporated in the 3D layer. It's more like holographic is what you see on the computer when you're trying to describe a very complex shape, and so in the same sense, it's our brain trying to understand a higher dimensional shape, which it doesn't function in that sense, or at least not the way our two eyes and our kind of simple, at least on ground level, brain sees it. More like the holographic thing is when you have that dream and you wake up crying, or super with like nostalgia or whatever. Like that was a hologram, not it looks like this little spinny thing that does this. You can map the experience out, and you're in those angles, but doing that that's the challenge, because one of them is happening like a dream at the. Whoa, come on, mouse, what are you doing? What are you doing there? It's happening like a dream at the speed of light, where 1, 2, 3 aspect of it, the linearity, is wrapped up into one infinitesimally immeasurable quantification which exists, but it passes through a qualia or qualitative layer of experience, which wraps it up into a consciousness type experience, which your brain or your mind somehow experiences. And in that sense, your brain has a non-physical recording system, your holographic memory, and the universe does as well. And they're two interfacing, and that's where you can get the information coming to you non-linear in a non-linear format. It's kind of like saying more than you should pay. You get more than you. I don't want to say you pay 25 cents to get a stick of gum or something, and then you get a whole pack and you get more than you pay for, because you don't pay for it. But it's like an inverse. You always get the inverse. It's hard to explain. You get an exponential result based upon what linear options you put in. So the point is, you don't have to get more, but if you do it right, you get potentially or technically like infinite or 0 point translation. Put it that way. Just the same way information can be holographically lined up, and you can have this little, this sentence, and then you have a sentence in this huge book. In the same sense, in a holographic disk, you can have all the libraries and compress it that way. Same thing. Your mind can access that, and then you have all the experience of a lifetime in one experience. And so then the idea is that translational layer is what enables that, and so we're kind of looking at the difference, or at least the way I'm defining this, between what we experience and when we can compartmentalize and break down unique units of experience, as well as space-time units, from material measurements, energetic, any days, a calendar or object in your hand, whatever, the actual units that you can verify, to what we consider qualitative experiences and the substance of what creates our qualitative experience that we cannot actually substantially verify. And we have to differentiate through kind of cross-referential means, kind of like signal interference interactions, like we're comparing our consciousness or how we feel about things versus actually defining what's there in a direct format. But again, that's the trick, because this one works and is always there. This one just blows up every once in a while, and I don't know, it really doesn't, but it's kind of like a thought, how your brain there, the thoughts come and go, and there's this big loop of them going. What we think is one thing coming and going and so on is just like a plethora, a sea of things, but in that same sense, that sea of things is actually just one big cloud of, not endless information, but complete information. And so then, the main thing I want, it's a coffee and everything kicking in, the main thing I wanted to explain is, with all these scribbles, is that more or less the concept, the basic concept, because we have that in physical space, and that was kind of a slight tangent, because it's the complicated idea that every event that happens in physical space is actually defining a series of combinations from an eternal database, basically, of our soul's potentials, cross-referenced against a kind of grid of space-time possibilities that creates a series of potential timelines that kind of strum like guitar strings to play out an experiential, qualitative dream time reality, which gives us super weird higher feelings as a collective, which goes and dribbles through this gradient and draws up space-time actualities as what we experience or call timelines. Which I know that doesn't really make sense, but um, so the idea is everything that happens here, it's as if it's mapped out already somewhere else, and it's as if at the same time it's not really happening, but it's like this kind of expanse thing. I don't know how to describe it. Like you have one of them, those balls with the lightning going through it at like Spencer's or whatever. You have one of that, and it's just, or a particle accelerator. It's just all in a quantum flux suspension. Everything's happening at once. You take from that you funnel all of that somehow into some type of infinitesimally small singularity, and then from that everything is expanded back out, but it's done so through a gradient, a matrix, like a, I don't know how to put it, and it's almost as if you have a ball of something, the ocean, but at the same time it's light, and it's like the sun, it's like a star. Oh shoot, oh no, be right back. Hopefully it's still in view for the most part. And so then it's weird. It's almost like everything just what is going on now? I'm not clicking anything. It's almost like that's going on, that the ocean or whatever it is, or light. Um, and it's kind of like it swells and undulates, just like the ocean, but it's also like the sun. Basically, it's also like your emotions in a sense, like you're thinking, and that goes through that gradient. It goes up a tunnel, and then it's literally like the seashore, but for some reason it has so much energy that it flows uphill. It has to go up. It's like that's the point. And it gets up to there, then it has weight now. It's like it's transferred into, it's given mass so that it has some type of physical resonance or structure or density to it. And then it falls down this waterfall that has all these grooves in it printed into it. These dudes just come and chisel everything and imprint into it, or maybe the sun does it, or lasers do it, or the wind, or bugs come and crawl, or I don't know, maybe ladies weave the shirts for the dudes to wear when they do it, and it's the power in the cool patterns in the clothing. It reminds them of everything they love. And but the water falls through that, and it basically creates a resulting vibratory cymatic pattern that etches out into some type of lower space that manifests as stars and planets and so on. And it's just the strangest thing, but it has to be described that way because what we think we're seeing is actually a kind of geometric, physical, visual, perceptual illusion from multiple other things. And the fact that we're seeing the illusion means that we cannot break down where the other things, the component and the illusion, begin and end, and that's the point. And in understanding that process, we understand more about ourselves, and it might really be the like something like the spirit, the soul, and the brain, or something, or maybe the brain is the device, the lensing device here, and then you have the soul as your imprint, then the spirit that's starting it, and everything breaks down into this reality, and we'll always have that because that's what's somehow really happening. But that's kind of neither here nor there, which is kind of a distraction. But either way, it makes it more meaningful to kind of begin to try to comprehend what I'm about to say, because it doesn't really make sense otherwise, which is more or less the concept that we pretty much have every unit there, everyone, every change in time. It's all, well, the change again is the grid and so on, but then, and the change is the soul. The grid is the space and time, and the time itself is our consciousness. And so, but everything that we can see as a complete whole, basically the souls, the people, they exist, and maybe not all of them, but to soul families or groups or islands, like I call them, because it kind of appears that way to me, or it just feels that way in the description and trying to put everything together. Like it's part of who we are, and part of who we are is what is, like it's just strange, almost like something that lives inside of itself, which is very weird. But we kind of do that anyway if you think about it. We just do it, and we kind of don't want to accept it, and so we do a whole bunch of other stuff. But every single individual consciousness exists as one complete consciousness, one one whole simultaneous occurrence in which everyone's consciousness is happening all at once. It's like a cloud. And in that sense, the the linearity, the format, the informational format that is required to understand the processing of that does not follow a linear sense, and it is a quantum synthesis. And on a side note, if you make your problems last as long as you, they'll die with you. And if they die with you, they'll probably follow you into the afterlife, or whatever you want to call that. Just like the mythology of, ancient Egypt or something like that. And if you have, take your success with you and so on, but in a different way. You don't have to, like, kill your dog. And so then you could do things quick and get it over with, and then cycle up, if you will, through layers, or you could make it last your entire lifetime, and then the problems become a part of you. See, in the same sense, somehow that worked out to help describe what I'm saying, whereby our mind then lives inside of itself and the changes that it creates, and if you're not aware, you're living in your own filth. And it's like you're literally, higher beings come, or just humans from, like the past, or our parent civilization, or whatever you want to call it, and their minds are aware of every change, and they can look at your body and read your genetics and see yourself in time, and they literally see you sitting in a cloud of your own poop. Things would happen differently if we could see all the layers of the universe that we were interacting on throughout all of time in every moment that we were interacting. Probably wouldn't do a lot of this stuff. For instance, if sugar or certain foods blocked out certain genetics or certain aspects of our higher self, in the sense that, say, over generations of time, too much sugar mutates genetics in a certain sense, or wheat, say, mutates the genes for memory, long-term memory, over like soul type memory, like Latin epigenetics, and that they're manufactured for that process. If you could see that, if you had this room or this, tunnely thing that you could sit over or under or something like that, and it would allow you to connect to your genetic level of consciousness, and you could see that happening, maybe you'd literally go get a different breakfast that day and see more memory come on, and you could literally guide. Hilariously, it would be like Rick and Morty, where Morty has the future crystal or something, and he's only doing that which pushes him closer by inadvertent action to his possible future of living a long life, dying old with his like stalker crush, basically, because he's basically stalking her through multiple dimensions. And I just remember the time he had a device that attracts whatever, or pulls whatever you want, like a magnet, and then he just had all the pretty girls in his town. Anyway, Morty's got a little bit of a edge to him. Might have to be anyway. Also, on a tangent now, to say humanity is doing that over time because we don't know where we're going, but we're creating ourselves in that sense, and so essentially we're walking backwards in the dark with our minds, because, and it depends, if you're chasing something invisible with your desire, you're walking backwards in the dark, feeling basically with your shoulder blades. You better hope it's not a sharp thing or a cliff. If you're creating in front of you the goal of what you want, like a quantum tunnel perceptual mirage gateway, that you has to create like a magnifying glass to focus all your energy into a focal point to see, and then you're going towards that, then you're in control, you're walking forward, and you're using the light of your own consciousness to pretty much pave the way. We're we don't really think about that, but if we're accidentally getting what we are getting, it opens the way for not knowing what's going to come next, and also developing a collective unconscious that is just that, unconscious of the process that we're using to get what we want, which could be a good thing maybe if we're going through something that we need to develop the powers for, which was something the strength, something I was going to talk about earlier, which is that if you can learn to do what you're supposed to do in the dark, in the sense that where you wouldn't want to do it, where you don't want to be doing it, where you aren't comfortable doing it, and if you do it, you have to force yourself to do it because it's not going to happen any other way. You gain the power of doing it, for the most part, basically in the dark, and also means any other time. Which, if the balance, the dark should be a blip, and so then through that little hiccup, that speed bump, you figured out how to climb a mountain, which is it's a good thing. That's the variation in quantum potentiality, basically your existence, that you can make anything into anything, which is, imagine that. You could look at that speed bump and fall and roll down the hill and just be like, I'm done. That's it. Just that. Oh, that's it. Done. Wow, I'm done. Or you could say, all right, well, this is a practice, and boom, now I'm ready to do anything. You could make it whatever you want, and that's the point. And so then the where was that? Okay, so that then in that metaphor, wow, that I used to describe waterfall and quantum suspension and so on, equating to consciousness, resulting in a linear kind of perceptual format and some type of space-time grid. There are formulas that they figured out. I don't really go there, but how to describe the translation, kind of like a Fourier transform of physical linear exchanges, and it's really the quantum into physical, and you have to reverse engineer it to do certain things, and it's also it goes into part of advanced technology and certain weaponization procedures, and so basically just think about from there. You could get energy, and as well, if somebody's mind is encoded in the natural format that it is, you can unfold information, and at that point you have access to the code of life, to the book of life, to DNA, to genetics, to memory, to mind, to consciousness, to language. You can translate the language of consciousness, time, space, and possibly all of the universe if they are connected. But it gets really weird from there. But so the idea here is just the concepts that the cloud is a potential, what we're looking at here as far as your information in your mind existing as the consciousness, the information of your consciousness existing as a set of potentials and memories and kind of variations in that, basically like a very big virtual box within a computer system running simulated systems, personalities. If your brain, I mean, we like to say it's like, but no, man, there's nitrogen in there and fat cells. I got a bunch of acetylcholine. Trying to think of interesting neurotransmitters and terms. But that is the biological computer system that's creating and running these simulated, realities. It's again, it doesn't mean to say like, oh, this reality's in your mind, it's a matrix. No, I'm saying like your personality, how it developed over time from your childhood, based upon emotional, mental input, variations, development, and so on, from the physical formatting of your development and hindrance to that, to the development of your emotional, mental sense, and your own self-will progression from that. It's kind of like a informational simulation. Even if it's real things, that's the point. You can describe it through information. So if there is a system that could manifest that and hold these virtual thought boxes, that could contain the processing information to accurately translate what we equate to a life and a human body and a bunch of rocks and dust and animals, environments and potentials and variables and so on. Ricky from anyway. Then you could pretty much begin to understand how in potentially higher space, potentially through our genetics, as a kind of huge blockchain cloud computing model that is literally made out of physical reality, just layers upon layers of people. It's almost like a building where you have layer by layer by layer, and each one is its own society, and each one has basically almost infinite space, nearly infinite resources. Really, the whole thing has one energy core, so all the resources have to be mapped out, and in order to map it out with a high level of variation, there has to be a high level of order. Where that order collapses, you begin to have a nullification of some of the variations. And if that's part of our house in this this multidimensional society thing, it's like a window goes away, okay, now the couch is gone, and so on. So, or time rearranges, and it can be very uncomfortable. But in that sense, you have a big multi-processing system. I always use the word multiplex, but apparently that doesn't fully define it in the sense that it is more like some type of quantum suspension where they are all happening at the same time, kind of like a singularity or a cyclone or a vortex, where you have all the potential change that exists in a system, everyone's lives, to give a metaphor, it's everyone's lives all kind of not strung out, but all the information there in one big connection, mapped out kind of together in this breathing kind of omnisynchronous space, basically as if it turns out that all those lives that were connected to those genetics happened to actually be one being from the center of time at one point that was experiencing them all at once in the same time. Um, in that sense, the information is actually revolving, if that turns out to be the case, with those beings as a kind of, not a cyclone, a vortex, but it's in flux. It's a stabilized fluctuation, and from that you get a kind of you get a model of interaction that enables the kind of information processing that is necessary to describe if this is what's happening and this is actually possible, which is proven when you figure out. I guess I can't say because there's a lot of tech involved and stuff like that, but you can do it genetically. You can do it with willpower. But you got to clean yourself and all that other stuff. You can't have junk in you. Half this world is about removing the stuff out of the way and pushing it out of your way instead of finding what you need. And that's the illusion that you can look forever, but if you don't realize there's gunk in your way and you got to flick that off the screen, that you're not going to be right in front of you. And then, but if this is possible, then you figure out, then you let's just say with those advanced systems, you could observe DNA, you could observe blood, and you could lens space and end up pulling information out seemingly out of nothing, which could end up being all the information of the universe if decoded properly. And then we basically look like giant, walking universal book systems, which also are like a storybook and choose your own adventure, and that it's mapping out the universe as it goes. Regardless, the vortex describes the effect and the process of a kind of a synchronous, simultaneous coalescence of multiple facets of seemingly disconnected information, but it's actually one string, like a blockchain, into a holographic singularity, a point of expression that equally, fully, and completely resonates or contains access to, pathway to, or translational maybe efficiency or reference of every bit of the previous information before, or somehow the truth of the information or the points of the information or some way of perceiving the angles, changing some type of third person angle of perspective of space-time itself so that you can see the points of events, and you can actually, the further back you go, the more all of information coalesces to one point, and you can see all of time as one point. Doesn't make sense, but at one point you take it and put it in one of the systems designed to understand that and work with that, and you can draw out multiple timelines. It doesn't really make sense, but then you have the body and the brain, and that's basically what it's doing. And so then we're in that state, and then I think I ran way off whatever schedule I was supposed to be on, but we're in that state, and then I don't know what else to describe from here, but there's ways to describe the translation from quantum to linear and linear to quantum, but they require all the power in the universe. Kind of metaphor, kind of not, especially given certain situations, and it only takes a little bit to spool that up, but you have to spool up 90% of it, and then the last 10%, otherwise it will take literally billions and trillions of years. Strange. Okay, so maybe this is a way to do it. So we're in this quantum suspension, all of it's happening at once, projected down to that weird system into a physical. Oh my gosh, I gotta change the setting. It magically changed again. I don't know what it's doing. It seems to be okay. Now it's not doing it. It's not flying around the screen. Whatever. The setting wasn't changed, but and through that weird thing, and then out of that we end up in this kind of world compartmentalized into these layers, and beginning of linearity, which breaks down into those layers, then breaks down until you get a physical dimension, a physical space with all these variations, or a physical timeline with the potential variations, and then you have each timeline mapped out based upon those variations, like a tree, And so then in this place, how we connect back to how our thought processes, the linear aspect of our conscious mind, that outer layer of the brain where the physical world is basically the outer layer of consciousness, the outer layer of the fractal, and it's actually apparently reversed from that angle, so it's like the slight inner, which is weird. The inside of the universe on the outside of physical space-time is out behind you. It doesn't really make sense. The further out you go, the further in you are yourself. Which is like one of those weird, trippy computer fractal systems, but then that's based upon the lensing of the universe, that's the right way out. And the looking at things the right way, like you look at a box and you go front to back into it, like that's backwards and inside out, because space-time is manipulated to get this type of space. Basically, like we're in a vacuum. We're in an inversion vacuum. Anyway, so the outer layer of your brain, or you could say the layer of consciousness, before you go deep down into all that stuff or super high and again, but just that regular layer of consciousness, that's where Earth resides. It's in that physical layer of the membrane. And so in your brain it's like that, but on the outside of the universe, you look at that, you also see something similar. And again, the Earth layers on the semi-inside. Anyway, how we translate what we're doing is doing it again. Stop going back over. It keeps going back over there. Okay, no, it's not. It's like it forgets. How we translate that and what we're doing, the pattern we're more or less creating as we're going through this multi-layer civilization or society building. Another secret might be that everybody starts at the layers and goes down and comes back up. So how we order our behavior, how we pattern ourselves, what we choose, whether our soul's journey is the goal, or whether our basically genitals, digestive tract, or certain parts of the brainstem, more or less, is that the goal. Whether you have your internal universe flipped right side up or upside down is going to determine whether your collective, your soul, drains into this world like a battery, or literally like a vein or an artery, I guess. Or honestly, like a vein, and then it's so weird. It's so weird. It's like a vein and an artery. The vein goes to the world, and it's supposed to do things and figure things out, and then come out like it's nourishment to the soul, which can't experience physical reality because it's that big quantum thing that is all of the possibilities at once. That basically gets some type of weird nourishment from it, drinks up the little, weird knowledge, wisdom from stubbing its toe and learning how to not get angry, and then it figures out how to control pain, and then it figures out how to control space and time itself. And it's like, oh, wow, that's neat. Instead, it's reversed, and it comes here and it's like, people think this is where we're doing the drinking from, and drinking from this world, and it's not food. It's just like a dream, and then it ends up draining the soul because the soul has a limited amount of energy, and this world ends up acting like a kind of bloodletting ritual, kind of like a kind of injury or wound, which more or less traumatizes, and then somehow imagine people get involved in realizing that we're passing through an infinite memory, infinite possibility into a limited, space through a projection system, and then some lock out the actions that would enable the interactions that would change aspects of this grid, this building system that we developed, this sandcastle of time we made over time, to enable more freedom, more liberation, so that people stop forgetting and stop hurting each other. And imagine some people then, map the system out to basically ensure that. So that's the part of the explanation behind that. Maybe that's the reason for the entire video. Thank you.